There we go. Welcome to this week's Sunday Series presentation. My name is Maggie Zimmerman. I'm a member of the District 10 Como Community Council. Each year, the Como Community Council puts on a number of Sunday Series presentations, typically in the early part of spring when folks are maybe getting a little stir crazy due to the weather. So this year's series runs every Sunday through March 27th at 1 p.m. You can always find the full schedule on our website, and I'm going to put that in the chat right now. This is on our website at District 10 the District 10 comopark.org. You can also find them on our group's Facebook page or in our weekly newsletter. And so look for that link in the chat here momentarily. Let's see if I can do it. There it is. At the end of the presentation today, we'll use any remaining time for a question and answer session. I do ask that you please keep your microphones muted during the presentation today, just so we don't interrupt our presenter. Like I said before, this is being recorded, so it will be posted to our website for reference later on. With all of that said, it is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, the Honorable Edward Sheu. Ted is a Ramsey County District Court Judge, a former D10 board member and volunteer, and a D10 resident for the last 18 years. So with that, welcome Ted, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Maggie. If anyone ever can't hear me, please let me know. I really appreciate being invited and look forward to chatting with everybody. I enjoyed these series. I watched the one from Richard McLemore. It was quite a while ago, but that was a really good one, and the mapping prejudice. So this Sunday series is really, really cool. I'm glad you guys are doing it. So thanks for having me. I want to just give a little overview of our court system. It has struck me, and since becoming a judge a year and a half ago, how little people know about the courts. This is our third branch of government, and people who are really well informed, really well educated about everything going on in politics, and they know who all their elected officials are. When it comes time to, kind of look at the other side of the ballot, they're like, who are these people? And, what's this all about? So I was hoping to elucidate a little bit on our court system and the court procedures, especially now during the pandemic. It's been a bit of a change. So with that said, I'm gonna share my screen for a moment here, if I can. Is that working? Can you see? Okay, great. Looks like it's working. So, so I've only been a judge for a year and a half, and before that, I was a lawyer for 19 years in private practice, doing civil and commercial litigation, and did some Indian child protection work for tribes. Since becoming a judge, I've been assigned to the criminal division here in Ramsey County, and it's been a big learning curve and a big change of pace. So briefly, first, what we're looking at here is the mncourts.gov. This is the main homepage for the entire state court system. It's really a good website, easy to navigate. It's a treasure trove of information if you're kind of willing to poke around a bit. Our state court system is unified. It didn't used to be, but I forget when, many decades ago, it was all unified into one court system. And you can kind of go to the help topics and get a lot of questions answered that way. You can figure out how to pay fines, get court forms if you're trying to do something on your own. Access case records, I'll talk about this in a moment, file a case. And then I'll focus a little bit here on find your court. So Minnesota has 10 judicial districts, and you can kind of see them on the map. Ramsey here is the second. Second judicial district is only Ramsey County. Hennepin is just the fourth. Other districts are made up of multiple counties, as you can tell. The ninth is kind of the biggest there, and so you can literally find your court. I'll go to Ramsey here. You can see a little bit about about what's going on here. There's news, there's court divisions, there's the civil court, criminal traffic, juvenile and family, locations and hours. A lot of people think about the courthouse. There's one main courthouse downtown in the city hall building. There's also several other courthouses. There's the Juvenile and Family Justice Center up the street. It's where child protection cases are heard and juvenile delinquency cases are heard. The Law Enforcement Center, that's the fancy term for the jail. There's a couple of courthouses, a couple of courtrooms there for people who are arrested and need to see a judge. There's a commitment court. Then we have a suburban courthouse, which I didn't know before becoming a judge, out in Maplewood. If you ever want to know what any judge is doing on any particular day, you can look right here. You'll see all the 29 judges in Ramsey County and what they're doing any given day of the week. Court records, I'll talk about that in a moment. Here in Ramsey, we've got 29 judges. Hennepin, by contrast, has like 60 some judges. The other districts have varying amount of judges. It's kind of like the census. Each district gets a set number of judges based on the caseload. Kind of like the census. It's roughly equivalent to population. So obviously Hennepin has a ton of judges. We've got a fair amount, 29, and you can kind of see them listed here. Let me take a little segue over to how people become judges. For the most part, judges are appointed by the governor pursuant to a statute that's set out on the Judicial Selection Commission. So I don't know when this started. It's been going on for many years now. Governors typically choose judges who are recommended to them from a commission. And as you can see here, currently the governor's office is seeking applications to be on that commission. And it looks like it's an at-large attorney member seat. The commission is made up of attorneys and non-attorneys from around the state, and as well as for each district. So there's a second district group of people, 2 non-lawyers, and then a bunch of lawyers. The commission's role is to take applications from people who want to be a judge, typically lawyers. They interview the people, they look at their backgrounds, and then they recommend a few candidates to the governor's office. By statute, the governor doesn't have to pick a person that's appointed, but from my understanding, they pretty much always have since this commission's been out. So it's kind of a neat process. It's really transparent. When the commission recommends the 3 or 5 people to the governor, they're posted for public comment for a few weeks. So it's a pretty transparent process. So that's kind of a neat system. You know, they're vetted, they're chosen, and then they actually stand for election every 6 years. That's the typical way people become judges in Minnesota. There's also some more rare instances where a vacancy occurs in an election year, and then people can actually put their name on the ballot and run. And I think that's happened here in Ramsey before. So let me actually, I'm getting a little mixed up here. So, okay. So a few, back on this Minnesota Courts.gov website, among the information you can find is statistics. And it's actually kind of interesting. You can see what we do big picture. There are many thousands of cases filed every year across the state. These are just major criminal cases, so you can kind of see the numbers there. A little bit of a decline, as you can tell, over the past 4 years. Hard to interpret, perhaps, what all that means. You look at minor criminal cases, uptick, I guess, or actually, no, a decrease as well. You can also go by county, so we could pick our county if we want to. You can go by family. These are divorces and cases like that. Again, a little bit of a decrease. Hard to perhaps interpret too much into these numbers. Obviously, what's concerning here is like the homicides from 2017 to now. It's kind of increased, so that's on everybody's radar. So you can really get a interesting glimpse into what we do, big picture. Publications and reports. You can see the court system as a whole. The last data we have is from 2020, so it's perhaps a little bit skewed. I was just here, so that's why it's down there. So you can see this, the court system as a whole. I talked about our district. We're the second district, Ramsey County. There's 10 total. Overall, there's 285 judges throughout the state. That is to say, state court judges like me, district court judges. We've got the Court of Appeals. There's 19 judges at the Court of Appeals. They all sit at the Judicial Center, downtown St. Paul. They hear appeals that come from the district court, from my court and others. They also hear appeals from certain agencies. Like if you apply for unemployment benefits, for example, or you're an employer and you're contesting unemployment benefits, you're ordered to pay. That doesn't go through the court system initially. That goes to an administrative law judge, and the aggrieved party there can appeal directly to the Court of Appeals. Some other agencies also have a process where they go to what's called a law judge or an administrative law judge first, and then the party who wants to appeal goes straight to the Court of Appeals as well. Kind of like our federal system, then there's the Supreme Court, the Minnesota Supreme Court. There's 7 justices. And our Minnesota Supreme Court, kind of like the US Supreme Court, they take cases they only want to take for the most part. Most cases end right here at the Court of Appeals and go no further. The Supreme Court chooses cases. I think they take about 10% of the cases that are requested if they've got some statewide importance, or if there's some big rule of law that needs to be made, or something that needs to be clarified for everybody, not just an individual error that's made. The Court of Appeals is technically called an error correcting court, so that's where most cases end. The Supreme Court does take certain cases automatically. First-degree murder cases that are right here in the district court go automatically to the Supreme Court. Statewide election cases, if you remember Senator Franken versus Coleman, that case went straight to the Supreme Court. So some cases the Supreme Court automatically takes. There's another of cases that don't come to either my court or the Court of Appeals, but they do go to the Supreme Court, and that's workers' compensation cases. There's a special Court of Appeals just for them, for those kinds of cases, as well as the tax court. There's a Minnesota Tax Court of Appeals. Those decisions also go their own route administratively, and then to those appellate courts, and then if the Supreme Court decides the decision is worthy of review, they'll take that as well. So that's kind of how our big picture, how our state court system is set up. You can go through this document and you'll find, maybe it's easier to go here, to find our second district right here. So as you can see, we're one county, 29 judgeships. There's 5 referees. I haven't talked about referees yet. So referees are appointed by our court to help with certain matters. There's certain kinds of cases that have a really heavy caseload, eviction cases, harassment cases, conciliation court, which is also known as small claims court, child support cases. There's a lot of those cases filed, and to get through the sheer number, we have referees who are appointed to help us with those. Also some family cases. Then there's 3 child support magistrates as well. So big picture, we're kind of the certainly the second biggest county when it comes to cases in the state, behind Hennepin. District-wise, I don't think we're second in number, but that's because some of these other counties, like the 10th, or these other districts like the 10th, are made up of mini counties. So I think there's a few more judges there, and the caseloads might be higher, but that's because they have Anoka and Washington and Chisago and some other counties that are in them. Here you can kind of see what we do, what the 29 judges do. As you can tell, criminal is the bulk of it. Looks like almost 3/4 of our cases are criminal cases, and that corresponds to the fact that of the 29 judges, about 15 or 16 of us are assigned to the criminal division at any given time. And minor criminal, as you can see here, that's the bulk of it. Major criminal, those are the more serious felonies. These are include many of your run-of-the-mill DWIs and sort of minor domestic assaults, if you can call it that. Those make up much of the bulk here: trespassing, things like that, disorderly conduct. You can see how our district, and this is true with other districts, we've tried to change, especially during the pandemic, how we deal with warrants. A lot of people have warrants out for them because they missed court. They had a court date and they missed it, and so a warrant goes out. Sometimes people are cited for a minor crime and let go with a court date, and then they never show up. Or we have a bad address for them. There's no address for them. They're homeless. So a warrant, it goes out for them. Ramsey County issued a pilot project a couple years ago to try to reduce the number of warrants outstanding, because a lot of these people just don't know there's a warrant out for them, and they could be arrested at any given time. So that's been, as you can see, kind of changed the appearance rate from 83, or the missed appearance, appearance rate from 74 to 83. So it was a useful thing. And we've also started to issue certain kinds of warrants for certain kinds of cases where they're not arrested, they're just stopped, given a court date, and let go again. Also to reduce the number of people down at the jail in time of COVID, and keep in mind that people are often transient and don't have a solid address, and the mail never got to them. You can read a little bit more here on the website about how the pandemic has changed things, and I'll tell you as well. I started in the middle of the pandemic, so my first court appearances, there were some in person, but most were just like this, by Zoom, like other sectors of the economy and life. Most of my days are still by Zoom court. I go into the courthouse, go into my chambers, close the door, turn on the computer, and open court session. And so people, last summer we opened up a little bit, had some in-person court hearings, and then it went back to Zoom once the pandemic surged. Now it's kind of the same thing. We're being hopeful for April, May, we're going to start going back in person, but who knows? We're hearing about numbers. We're just following the data, I guess. We're always a little bit behind on where things are at. One of the benefits, though, of all this, just like everybody else in every other sector, there's pros and cons. One of the positive things has been that people have really been able to make court appearances that couldn't before. I've had people appearing in court, and I can tell they're in the stockroom at work and they're on their device, and that means they're not missing their job and not getting, losing out on pay, and they're making what would just be like a 10-minute court appearance. Other people, have pulled over in their car and they're making a court appearance instead of driving 50 miles to the courthouse and parking and paying for everything. So the access to the courts, because of the remote hearings that we've set up, has increased in many ways. And there's talk about that continuing after the pandemic's over for certain kinds of cases. Maybe not so much for criminal cases, but civil cases, family cases. I think there's been a lot of positive reaction to people being able to save the drive downtown, perhaps driving in from out of town, and popping in for what can often be a short hearing that's adequately done by remote technology. So that's probably here to stay in some aspects of the court system. For criminal cases and for jury trials in particular, that's not in the cards, and probably will never be, and probably for good reason. We've got the courthouse downtown with that we've been able to retrofit in times of surges. We have plexiglass. We've got spacing. If you've ever gotten a jury summons, I don't know if anyone has, but you're supposed to call down and check in, and maybe you come down and you to the courthouse and you sit and nothing happens. So that's going to continue, but we're going to try to be a little more mindful when you get in. Before you come in, we check to make sure, are you feeling okay? You're not exposed to anybody or anything like that. We check you again before we bring you up to the courtroom, and that's one of the first questions I ask jurors: is everybody okay? Is everybody feeling well? Any of the following symptoms, and so forth. So that's probably going to continue, and we're all kind of used to doing that now. So I think mask or no mask, we're going to kind of figure out how to do jury trials. They were put on hold at the beginning of the pandemic for a few months, and then when they started, they were we could only do a few trials at a time, and for a while we were doing them in the basement of the courthouse in a big conference room where people could space out. All of that's created this huge backlog that we're slowly working through. Old cases got backed up, new cases keep coming in. And so at one point, I know there were, just in Ramsey County, there was like 7,000 or more cases backlogged. And the latest numbers I heard, it'll take 2 years or more at a very deliberate, rigorous pace to dig ourselves out. And it's created some changes I've noticed. I mean, I wasn't around over in the past, but my understanding is that it's made a lot of prosecutors, for example, instead of saying asking for a high bail amount or a bail amount and having people held in jail to keep the jail population low for COVID, they've offered different ways of letting people out. And it's actually, I guess we have to see the statistics for sure, but the hope is that if it was successful in getting people back to court and not committing any new crimes between then, that maybe we'll continue that change to the release conditions and bail settings. That's been a hot topic, is bail generally, and people being released before trial when they're accused of crimes. If you can look up the statistics on incarceration in our country, and most people incarcerated in our country are there. They haven't even been found guilty yet. They're sitting waiting for trial, and they're in state court jails around the country, and it's because they can't post bail. So it creates a lot of equity issues and concerns about people sort of doing time before they've even been found guilty and when they're presumed innocent. So tough issues that the pandemic has shed some light on, perhaps. So I want to get over as well, you know, the point I was trying to make as well with the Zoom court. Let me close out of this if I can. Is that people who want to come down to the courthouse, which is always open, most case courtrooms are open to the public at any time. And as I said, you can kind of find what any judge is doing at any given day. Since it's going to be on Zoom and has been on Zoom, you can kind of pop in from the comfort of your home if you want to see any court proceedings. I mentioned before, we have traditionally had cases. There's 2 courtrooms at the law enforcement center where people are arrested and they have a right to see a judge within 36 hours. So there's 2 courtrooms there. We haven't been going in for a year and a half now, and so it's all on Zoom. That's all on Zoom. Most court proceedings other than jury trials are on Zoom. Most civil cases are on Zoom other than child protection or delinquency cases. So if people are interested, they can track down a Zoom link to pop in and watch court, and people do that as well. I've had students, college kids who are thinking about going to law school. I've had law students. I've had people who are in court reporter school who want to get a feel for court and practice their speeds on the stenography machine, pop into Zoom. It's really been kind of remarkable that people can watch court live in real time, really going on, and not have to drive downtown, pay for parking, muddle their way through the courthouse and find something. It's been pretty slick, and hopefully will continue to some degree. To that end as well, our state court website as well, if you can see here, the access case records, you can kind of look up pretty much any case you want by, here's the appellate courts. You can look for what's going on appeal. Here in the trial court or district court, you can find your way eventually to looking up cases. So you can look up criminal cases, civil, family, probate. You can see if somebody's got a judgment against them. Here's the court calendar as well. You can kind of go by county if you want to narrow it down. You can search by name, birth date, case number. Currently, from the public access like this from your home, you'll just be able to see a record of things. You'll just see the names of entries of things. If you come down to the courthouse and do this, you'll actually be able to click on the hyperlink and pull up the document itself. So if people want to see a complaint or a full document, they can see it and they can print it out, I think, for a small copy fee. There's been talk about making that function available to people everywhere, to be able to see the actual document printed out at home if you want to save it. I don't know if that's up and running yet. I don't think it is. There's been some concern about overloading the system. The federal courts, incidentally, you can do that. You have to pay 8 cents a page or something like that. Maybe that's where this is going to go eventually. So that's how you can access court records. Let me try to get out of this. And circle back. Yep. So once again, on this main court website page, you can pull up Ramsey County, you can pull up any county, and there's really, as I mentioned, a wealth of information about what's going on in the court at any given time. and including current COVID information, which is really important. If you're going to come down to the courthouse, make sure to know if you got to bring a mask or not. Other than that, candidly, I didn't have, Maggie, a ton more to present. I was hoping to just field any kinds of questions about how our courts work, especially here in Ramsey, and kind of engage in a bit of a dialogue if anyone is interested, keeping in mind, I can't talk about any given cases or, how I should rule or anything like that. But, happy to answer a lot of the questions about the court system.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think so at this point, then we'll open it up to questions. And there's a small enough group of us where I think it's okay to just unmute yourself, or if you want to put a question in the chat, you can use the hand raised feature if you want, but we will just open the floor at this point. And while other people maybe think about theirs, I had a question. Actually, I have two questions. So my first question is not necessarily related to the courts, but you have been a D10 resident for a long time. You served on the community board at one point in time. And so I guess I am always curious for people who, do community service and also kind of have a career in a service type, public service type area, I guess I would say, like how you see yourself now as sort of a member of both the public community and the judicial community.
Yeah. Good question. I've, becoming a judge has put some certain restrictions on, I certainly can't put anything, can't put any signs on my lawn other than Como kindness sign or something like that. So there's certainly been some, judges all have this code of ethics where you have to remain neutral and appear neutral overall. A judge actually got in trouble somewhere else in Minnesota for liking, certain pages on a Facebook. So judges definitely have to be very mindful of expressing anything that might call into question your impartiality if an issue comes before you. So I know there's been topics before when the German school was going to condemn the church, and all sorts of hot button issues in the neighborhood, even zoning issues and land use issues. It's been on the one hand kind of stifling to just keep your mouth shut and not express an opinion. On the other hand, that's part of the job, is to keep an open mind. And so, but nonetheless, I think, one of the questions I got asked is that when applying to be a judge was, how do you go from being a zealous advocate as a lawyer to being a neutral, impartial, impassive, decision maker? And, and the answer is really that you don't change your, it's not like you no longer have opinions. You just advocate instead for a fair process and a fair system. And that's a bit like being on the, when I was on the D10 board, it's about making sure everyone has a voice. The unpopular developer has as much right a seat at the table for discussion as the neighbors do when it comes to, whether to put a certain business in or not. So that's a bit like my role now, is making sure, being a zealous advocate for the system and for the process. I've had since being on the bench 4 jury trials, and in the back of my head, I might have my own opinion about how it should go, but at the end of the day, as long as it was done properly and fairly to everybody, that's success. So being a D10 member still, I sort of have to just pick my opportunities to be a part of things. And there's some things I just can't be a part of. So it's a little strange, but that's part of the territory, is and that's part of what I knew going into this, is that I'm going to be have to be a little quieter in some ways. So
I really like that idea of a zealous advocate for the system, right? It doesn't have to be for a particular issue. It is for transparency and education and discussion of the system. I like that.
yeah. And that was kind of what I was hoping here, going back to what I said originally. I was really, and I'm still struck when people who I know are super well informed, well educated, they'll just say, who's this person who's running against this person to be a judge? And I'm almost like, don't you know? Like, it's right there in the legal newspaper. Don't you read the Minnesota Lawyer or the Bench and Bar? And then I'm like, well, of course you don't. I mean, why would you? So my hope would be to, keep people informed a little bit that this more mystical branch of government, and going back to the last question, Maggie, judges don't campaign here in Minnesota like they do in other states. I used to practice law in other jurisdictions sometimes, including Texas, Wisconsin, and boy, around election time, things were the Wild West. Minnesota has a really nice tradition of not having a really outwardly political, judicial politics. I mean, you don't, affiliate with a party and run on a party platform, and so it's made it pretty good, big picture, to not have to express all sorts of opinions about how you're going to rule or anything like that, and there are ethical rules restraining it.
Thank you. How about Paula or Mary or Anya? If any of you have questions, you can throw them up here now.
I will say too, we were planning to last state fair have a booth like we have in the past, and we called it off, I think, because the numbers were too high. So hopefully, if the numbers are better this August, we'll have a booth, judicial branch booth before. I think it's buried in one of the buildings, but there's a wheel you can spin and you can get a little gavel pencil. So
I have that gavel pencil somewhere on my desk here.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have one other question then. I think a lot of people, as you said, you can be kind of unaware of how the court system functions, right? Like it is a little bit of an invisible part, because you tend to only interact with it as a Joe Schmo citizen if you're in trouble, or if you get that jury selection notice. And I am always so curious. So I've lived in Minnesota most of my life, and I got my first jury summons about 3 years ago. And I did get seated on a trial, and I loved it. And I want to just be called for the jury all the time because it was so fun. And it was so interesting to see how the process works like that. And so I'm always curious if there is, why is it that some people seem to get selected all the time, and some people, they're retiring and they've never been selected. And I don't know if I know that there's not like a rhyme or reason to it necessarily, but from the judge perspective, do you see a lot of repeat jurors, or do you see a lot of folks who, are trying to avoid being on juries, trying to find ways out, things like that?
Great question. And I'm glad you had a good experience. There's been a lot of talk actually as well recently about jury selection generally. It's another one of those controversial topics like mass incarceration, where there's some inequities in how jurors are even called upon and summoned and chosen. Right now, by statute or court rule, the courts bind you to summon you by looking at certain things like driver's license records, property tax records, voter registration rules, maybe a couple other criteria. It's all kind of set out in a rule. And so the juror office, that's how they find people's names to begin with, which itself is kind of part of the controversy. Some people say, well, look, if you move around a lot, because you're transient. You're never going to get on the roll. You're never even going to be called upon in the first place. If you're a renter, you're not a property owner. You might not be called upon. So if you don't kind of fit each of those criteria, which are designed for stable people, you're never even going to get summoned. So that's kind of one of the topics that some people are calling for a change in how we even select and find potential jurors to begin with. As to those who are then summoned down to the courthouse, we think about it a lot. Every few weeks we're called upon. So I've got the next 2 weeks I'm on trial duty, and we'll have jurors who've been summoned already. They're supposed to come down tomorrow at 9 a.m. or 8 a.m. and wait down in the basement until they're called up. And we do take care to make sure, if you just got summoned and did service, in the past 6 months, we don't want to burden you. So we think about that. There's a whole process you probably sat through, Maggie, of called voir dire, where questions are asked, do you know me? Do you know any of these people? Do you have any preconceived notions about how this case should go? During that process, it's actually a pretty good vetting. I ask questions, I let the lawyers ask questions, and at the end, we can kind of weed out who really doesn't want to be there. No one wants to really be there, but who really doesn't want to be there, and who's going to do a bad job because they don't want to be there. Sometimes people want to be there a little too much, and that's concerning too. Then there's the folks who, for one reason or another, should be excused. With COVID, it's added an extra element. If someone's extremely vulnerable or extremely nervous, and they're, they can do it, but they just are going to be nervous the whole time. We don't want that either. So that's why we summon so many people for misdemeanor or gross misdemeanor case. We summon like 15 people up to the courtroom just to pick 7 in the end. For a felony, we pull up 25 people so that we get 13 in the end. So we kind of make sure the people we get are, have passed enough tests of answering questions the right way. There's another dimension to that. It doesn't happen too often, but if the people who are, each lawyer gets to strike certain number of potential jurors. You can strike people for cause if they say, I don't like criminals, or I don't like police officers. Well, they're excused for cause. Lawyers can also just say, I don't like this person, so I'm gonna strike him. Something about him, I don't like his mustache or something. But if it's based on race or ethnicity, that raises another element. So sometimes that will come up, and we have a little hearing about whether, why are you striking the only Black juror on the jury? When, why? You better have a non-race reason for doing that. So that can come up. And what I've noticed, with Ramsey County is pretty diverse, population-wise, demographic-wise. The jury pool we get sometimes reflects that diversity, sometimes it doesn't. And when it doesn't, I'm always curious, what the heck's going on? Why aren't more summonses getting to representative population? So hopefully that'll be, looked into further as some advocates are calling for.
Thank you. I want to be, maybe I'm one of those people who wants to be a juror again, and they're like, no, this is but it was I think you're right, the idea that people just don't interact with the judicial system very frequently. And so it really, my experience at least, was it was just this whole, kind of area of society that I just had no familiarity with. And so it was it was a neat opportunity to be a student of the system.
Yeah, and well, something else you said, Maggie, about people don't come to court unless you're getting charged with something, you're getting a divorce, you're getting sued, you're suing somebody. I mean, you don't go to court, somebody died, there's no reason to really go to court unless something bad or negative has happened. Or you're getting summoned for $10 a day or whatever it is they pay jurors. Or, maybe an adoption, but even then that means somebody's parental rights are terminated. So there's, court is always a place where something not positive in your life has happened. So yeah, I think maybe that's why people don't kind of focus on, you go when you have to go and no other times. That's what, one of the reasons that I kind of wanted to be a judge was just knowing that is why people go in. They're scared, they're, embarrassed, shameful, whatever happened. It's a complicated process. There's all these lawyers talking a lot of lawyer talk and judges talking a lot of lawyer talk, and it can be really daunting, and you're just told to go where you're supposed to go. So my attempt has always been to try to just make the process as human and normal as possible and talk to people really plainly, so that it's a little more of a, inviting and easy to understand process and place. So yeah, I think you're right. It's maybe that is part of why it's considered this mystical branch of government, is because you don't, it's not like on the news every day. There's not, and if you do see courtrooms on TV, like a televised trial or something like that, or court TV, it's often meant to be kind of dramatic, or it's not like or it's incredibly boring, like C-SPAN. It's like if you're going to watch a court TV, it's like, oh my God, I can't sit through 8 hours.
And it is, I mean, to some extent, it's a different language, right? For most people, like it is in the same way that, if you dropped in on a conversation with a bunch of surgeons, you would be out of your depth. You don't have a good, touch point for that. I think that, we often interact with the medical community for these regular checkups, but you don't have your annual check-in with the justice system where you are forced to speak that language or kind of, interact with that community.
Right. No, that's a good analogy for sure. You don't go to the doctor's office unless you have to. You don't come to the court unless you have to. So yeah, I think, but if the information is there for people, I haven't actually looked at our own website until preparing for this, and it is quite amazing what all your answers are there somewhere if you root through. And so we have a really good system. As I mentioned, as a lawyer, I did do some work in Florida, Texas, Wisconsin, other states, South Dakota, Idaho, and it's sort of like you don't appreciate home until you go travel elsewhere, and you're like, oh my gosh, I like it so much better at home. It's a bit like with courts too. You practice law in other states, and you're just like, oh my gosh, we do it so much better back in Minnesota. It was really, that was my experience as a lawyer, and as a judge, I kind of see as well. We, for example, judges have to make decisions timely by statute. So if an issue is submitted to a judge, other than the Minnesota Supreme Court, all other judges have to make their decision at the latest within 90 days, sometimes sooner. In other states, that's not always the case. I mean, I had a case in Delaware where the judge just sat on it for like 2 years, and other courts as well. It's just like, oh my God, how does your system? There's no justice in systems like that. So Minnesota has a very, it's a really good process. A lot of rules are set up to make things work efficiently. And a lot of the high-profile trials recently too in Hennepin. I mean, I think a lot of people just really appreciated how our system works overall. We're really lucky. And if you read about court systems in, not to throw other states under the bus, but if you read about court systems in like the South and people kind of sort of rotting in jail before trial and things like that, or Rikers Island, you can be kind of assured that doesn't happen here. And I've seen it not happen here. That's not the case here. So we're quite fortunate to have a really good, strong legal system and court system.
Thank you. Are there other questions here today?
Quiet bunch.
I know. All right. Well, Judge Sheu, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you all for attending. Our next Sunday series, the last one of this year, is next Sunday, March 27th at 1 p.m. with Dr. Kim Heikkila, who will be talking with us about the Booth Memorial Hospital history. So I'm going to stop our recording now. Yes.